turns out you die twice. Now, contrary to what your dippy yoga teacher has to say about the merits of a raw food diet or walking barefoot through the woods 3 times a day, if you are in fact alive in 2024, you will in fact at some point die, physically. And by this, I don't mean partially dead or mostly dead. I mean, as they say in the movies, completely and utterly dead. Now, when this happens, one of the first things that happens is your astral body separates from your physical body. And unlike during the process of astral travel, there's no silver cord connecting it back to the physical body. Now, again, contrary to popular belief, this is a very uncomfortable experience, i.e. it hurts. It hurts a lot. And again, contrary to popular belief, it takes quite a while to happen and is incredibly painful when it does. The myth of the sudden death, barring your body being turned into vapor by, say, an artillery shell, is just that. It's a complete myth. And it's a myth because most people don't want to spend the time pondering what's going to happen at the very end of the ride. They'll just live through it, pun intended, when it happens. Now, when your astral body separates from your physical body, the process of astral death begins. Now, this happens because the astral body is powered by breath. And since you no longer have a body, you're not making any more astral energy to reinforce that body with. So, all of that breathing you've done over the course of a lifetime, depending upon who you ask, it can take anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks for that astral body to run out of energy and, in effect, die. It doesn't completely die, though. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, depending upon who you ask, this can take as much as 40 days. This is sometimes referred to as a bardo state in some religions. As a practical matter, I've never really seen it take much more than about a week. And this is that period in which living loved ones will remark that they feel the presence of the recently departed. In some cases, they may even see them standing in the kitchen, for example. Almost never takes more than a week. There are some exceptions. Now, there are some esoteric techniques that allow an astral body to stay active for extended periods of time after post-death, but these are relatively unpleasant, and you certainly won't be hearing about them from me here on this channel. I will say, people who engage in this pay a very heavy karmic price for those activities at some point in time. All right, so what happens to your astral body when it runs out of juice? Well, it turns out your astral forms are stored as kind of energetic husks or shells in a certain place on the astral. If you're using a planetary alignment system for this, sometimes this can be referenced as Pluto. I have visited this place. And what you'll see is the discarded astral husks of people who were gone. And if you walk up to one of them and you have the right skill, you can reanimate them for short periods of time before they go back into this fugue state. Now, I don't know how long these things exist like this, and maybe they eventually do completely decompose into the elements. It's hard to say. But what's interesting about encountering these things is if you manage to revivify one for a few seconds, what you'll find is a very interesting conversation where the astral body has the memories of the life it lived through, and on a certain level the skills it did, but it doesn't have the spirit, or what some call the soul. So if you ask it about what happens after death, it doesn't actually know. It just has the recorded memories of a human being's life. Pretty interesting. Now again, once the energy you've given them wears off, they go back into that fugue state, and that's it. Okay, so we've talked about the death of the physical body. We've talked about the death of the astral body. We talk about what happens to the astral body when it runs out of energy. Well, what happens beyond this? Okay, first off, there's a process of judgment that goes on. Now, I know this is not in vogue in esoteric circles these days, but let me be very clear. How you live your life will result in how you are treated in the afterlife, full stop. If you run around acting like a jerk all the time, you can expect the afterlife you inhabit to not be particularly pleasant. Now, this does appear to be broken into two different pathways. For people who don't have access to their own Akasha and non-dual light, they tend to go through a fairly societal specific method of judgment. Stories about the Egyptian system of, the heart lighter than the feather, this kind of thing, you can look it up. Suffice to say, in those cases, you will go to the heaven commensurate with how you comported yourself during your life. So, as one of my teachers once said, meth bikers go to meth biker heaven and little old church ladies go to little old church lady heaven. Now, one of those can look an awful lot like hell to the other. Take that for what it is. But I just said this is what happens to you if you don't have access to your own Akasha and your own non-dual light. If you do have access to Akasha and your own non-dual light, you are judged by a completely different standard. Basically one that says, did you abuse Akasha during your living lifespan? And if you did, you get shipped off to a very special part of the astral that, again, under a planetary system, would be referred to as Saturn, where you are rehabilitated and taught the error of your ways. So, let's get into this a little bit more. If you're not part of Team Enlightened, you are judged separately from people who are. Because as someone who's had an enlightenment experience, you should, in theory, understand what you're dealing with. Whereas if you haven't, you're not going to be held to that standard because you simply don't know any better. This is where a lot of my friends get into trouble. Let me be very clear. We don't incarnate to hang out. This is not a world where you are welcome to sit around doing nothing all day long. You're here to have a very distinct series of experiences that are planned previously, and you're expected to take action upon them. If you choose not to, you're going to pay for that. You're going to pay for that probably pretty harshly. Because if you have the ability to act in accordance with enlightened will, you literally owe it to everybody else to make the world a better place. And if you actively choose not to, either through misbehavior or sitting on the sidelines like a Dilbert, you're going to pay. So that's a little bit about what happens after death. Now, here are some other things to keep in mind about this whole process. When you die, you no longer have a body, and therefore you no longer have breath. So how do you build power after death to do things with? Well, it turns out you do it through single-pointed focus. So the single-pointed focus exercises in the first part of the curriculum that virtually every good yogic system teaches, they're pretty important. Because once you no longer have a physical body, in the event you need power to do something with, you're going to have to do it through that mechanism. Because here's the important takeaway in all of this. The part of your body that survives and gets reincarnated in future incarnations is in fact your mental body. Now, I'll have another video on why that is exactly, but the bottom line is that bringing forward all of your past experiences and prejudices and issues and thoughts on things isn't generally very helpful. But there is a part of you that does go on and gets recycled in successive lives, and that is, in fact, your mental body. Now, one of the nice things about being a magician is, in theory, after you die, assuming you aren't sent to the penalty box, you have a lot of choice regarding how you will reincarnate in the future. With people who don't have these experiences and skills, it's a bit more of a lockstep kind of process, But suffice to say, taking the time to generate your own Akasha and own non-dual light, pretty valuable for that reason, because it gives you more choice in what you get to do in successive lifetimes. Now, I'm going to talk about one final point here that's a bit controversial. This involves the issue of astral travel, or learning how to consciously separate your astral body from your physical body. Learning how to do this sucks. It's really uncomfortable, it's extremely painful, and not a whole lot of fun. Usually most people get to that point by running enough Akasha that they spontaneously snap their astral body off of their physical. Okay, I won't get into the merits of that, but there is one important reason why you would want to learn how to do this. Remember at the first part of the video where I talked about how dying hurts? Well, here's the thing. If you know you are at the end of your lifespan, and you have the ability to astral travel, you can end your life on your own terms. So instead of having to passively go through the dying process, which, as I mentioned earlier, sucks pretty hard, you can choose to end it at a time of your own choosing. And if you study the lives of previous grandmasters, this is typically how they went out. They'd contact their students a few days or a few weeks before they chose the time in which they chose to die. They'd have one last satsang or group teaching, and then pop, they're done. They do this by separating their astral body from their physical body, and then severing that silver cord or connection between the two. Now, here's where you, again, have to be careful with this. If you do this too soon, it's treated as a suicide, and you will be judged very harshly for this in the afterlife. But if used intelligently, when you've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and you're in the last final few weeks of it, can in fact save you from a lot of pain and suffering. So, if you like the topic of today's discussion, give us a like down below and consider subscribing to the channel. Otherwise, as per usual, train hard and be well.